Mr. Aiken,
Here.
Mr. Zayas,
Here.
Mrs. Connor is absent, Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Cebulski. Here.
I'll second.
Mr. Cebulski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Aiken,
Yes.
Mr. Zayas.
Yes.
All righty. Well, thank you. Typically, I do not give a July, or June rather, superintendent report, but we are going to share a little bit about the recommendation for the construction based on the construction committee and the feedback. If you recall, the construction committee is a group of administrators as well as folks from TDA who are here, a couple of which are here tonight to answer any questions that, if they pop up, if I can't answer those. But I wanted to kind of just start in this with a little bit of a review. If you recall, the recommendation really comes from a number of events that began over a year ago. So we start actually way back in March of 2022, March through May. The district sent out a series of surveys to staff and all ACSD families in order to gauge the opinion of folks as to if the district should start to look into the potential new construction within the next 5 years. The survey overwhelmingly showed that both the staff and families believed that the district should start looking into the possibility of new construction. So then that prompted us to hold a series of meetings in September of 2022, in which we met with the staff in each of our 5 current buildings in the district and held 3 community meetings for stakeholders to provide feedback on the 3 most popular plans for the survey, which at that time was a K-3 elementary, a 4-5 intermediate, and a 9-12 high school. We created wish lists that the stakeholders contributed to, which gave us a chance to have a starting point. But it was clear in the conversations that very few people were interested in an intermediate school. So the plans were narrowed down at that point to either a K-3 elementary or a 9-12 high school. In November of 2022 through January 2023, we interviewed 7 architectural firms, visited 3 different school districts that contained buildings from our 3 architectural firm finalists, and in January of 2023, the Aurora Board of Education approved our recommendation to hire Then Design Architecture, or TDA, as our partners for this project. Now, during the next 3 months, the construction committee, as mentioned, which is composed of administrators and TDA members, created and met multiple times to begin to develop 2 sort of 30,000-foot sets of plans for the potential construction, which were then shared with staff and community during a series of community open house meetings in May and June of this year in 2023. So during the open house meetings, there were 6 stations set up with the ACSD staff and Aurora families or community members could take their time to visit, ask questions to either TDA or to the Aurora administrators who manned the stations. The stations included a K-3 elementary station, a 9-12 high school station, the design process station, which talked about timelines, the meetings, the next plans, that sort of thing, finance station, which Bill manned, and then a cost of doing nothing station, which talked about the cost of keeping Craddock, and then there was a station that had a series of short surveys. So the folks, as they made their way around and they exited, there were approximately 10 to 15 Chromebooks that were set up that allowed those in attendance to complete a short survey in order to provide feedback. And approximately 160 people attended the various open house nights in order to learn more about each of the plans, ask questions, and provide their own thoughts through both conversations and the formal feedback that I mentioned in the survey. In fact, over 120 parents, students, teachers, and residents submitted feedback, which we do appreciate because it helped us to meet our goals of gaining a better understanding of the community's feelings on the school facility plans. The survey, though not all those who attended provided feedback, the survey was a nice representation of the community from parents, community members, employees, and even alumni, as you can see in the breakdown as represented in this graph. Of those submitting the survey, as well as the majority of conversations, we had each of the stations, there was a clear lean towards favoring a high school plan, though the open house discussions as a whole provided great feedback from all perspectives. Now, some of the more common comments, which are kind of listed off to the right in terms of quotes from the survey, were for those that favor the high school, included that it's the best long-term solution and that we should focus on the high school as it is the centerpiece of the district. And you can read some of the other comments that are there and see the breakdown based on their affiliation. Those favoring the elementary school plan most commonly pointed out that it would address their our most immediate needs, and that it was the overall more cost-effective plans. And again, quotes, some of the more common quotes from the survey were listed off to the right, and the breakdown from the feedback on the left. And then we even had a small group who shared that they were not in favor of either plan, and had ideas in terms of what we could do instead of the two plans presented. Now, the input from these folks was also appreciated, as it provided some perspectives we had not necessarily thought of prior to these conversations. So the feedback from these meetings were further analyzed by the construction committee, and a discussion took place, and adjustments were made, and the recommendation to the board was then created as to which fork in the road, that's our plan for tonight, determine which fork in the road, the K-3 elementary school plan or the 9 through 12 high school plan. Now, as you can see that I pushed a little too early, is the construction committee is recommending to the board that the new 9 through 12 high school be constructed in the field between the current high school and Harmon Middle School. Grades 6 through 8 in the Aurora Board of Education offices would then move into the old high school. Grades 3 through 5 would move to Harmon, and pre-K classes as well as grades 1 and 2 would be held at Layton, with the kindergarten remaining at Miller Elementary. Now, this recommendation is different from our original thoughts, as it now includes adaptations to the plan based on feedback and discussions from the staff, families, community, and the committee as a whole after the open house meetings. Now, there are several reasons as to why the construction committee is recommending the high school plan over the elementary school plan. To start, the high school plan will provide a long-term solution to our growth in the community while addressing building and space needs in which our current buildings, whereas the elementary plan would provide immediate needs at the elementary level, but would fall short on the facility needs from a secondary and community standpoint. Now, the data table that I'm showing you here compares our current capacity using our present enrollment numbers, which are highlighted on the yellow portion of the graph, with the projected capacity in green when our current enrollment is applied as a comparison. So kind of let me explain. As an example, if you can see in the yellow part of the chart at the top that Miller's current capacity is at 139%, meaning it is currently very crowded, as you well know. Craddock is around 81.5% capacity, Layton 97.6% capacity, Harmon at 90.3%, and AHS is at 81.4%, moving down that yellow graph. However, if we build the new high school and the shift in grade levels, we shift the grade levels around as proposed, the current capacity of each of the buildings change, and this plan would provide a room for expected growth. So if you look at the green portion, keeping only kindergarten at Miller will lower the capacity from 139% to approximately 95% capacity, as shown on the green highlighted portion of the data table. But this will provide actually 4 more classrooms into which the grade level could expand, and we feel very comfortable that would be more than enough in terms of growth. Moving preschool over to the current 3rd grade hallway in Layton will only occupy a half of that wing, which will provide room for growth for the pre-K, 1st, and 2nd grades at Layton. And the capacity would drop from nearly 98% right now at Layton to 72%, as listed again in the green side of the graph, of the data table rather. Harmon would have the smallest capacity drop from 90% at the middle school to 88% as an intermediate school. But there's room for growth, and Harmon is one of those buildings we would target for remodeling to better fit the needs of an intermediate school, which would more efficiently and effectively use the current space. The old high school would provide plenty of room for the middle school students and staff, even if we utilized some of the space relocated, if we relocated the board offices. Under this plan, the board office would occupy 8 classrooms in the old high school, which would drop the estimated capacity from around 1,200 down to nearly 1,000. But with the current middle school enrollment numbers, that's still only at 70% capacity, which leaves plenty of room for growth. And then the last column, the last row, the proposed new high school at 1,300 students would also have little capacity concerns, with approximately 75% of the building's capacity being filled at our current high school enrollment level, which would also therefore leave plenty of room for growth. So as you can see, the high school plan will provide room for expected growth in our community and therefore our school enrollment over the years, but it also will meet our facility needs, which was part of the rationale for providing this plan. The high school is the most commonly used and visited building in our district, and having a new high school building will provide state-of-the-art facilities for the young people in the high school to utilize while serving as a centerpiece for Aurora community as a whole. As an example, a field house was one of those wish list items to be built in addition to the new school building, but by adding a high school, 2 new gymnasiums will be added to the district, which would be the equivalent to a field house large enough to hold 2 full basketball courts, as we would still be able to utilize the 2 gymnasiums in the old high school under this plan. This plan would also expand our auditorium, while the district and community could still utilize the auditorium at the old high school for smaller events. From a facility standpoint, a new high school would provide a greater return on our investment than the straight-up elementary plan. Now, as a reminder, under the proposed high school plan, we envision updates to the intermediate and elementary building as well. In particular, as mentioned earlier, Harmon's interior makeup would be revisited, which will be interesting to develop in a master plan because inside of Harmon was originally designed without interior walls, which makes it much more flexible to redesign than a typical school building would. We also would like to add a preschool playground area to Layton, which we currently do not have in the district at all, as Miller Playground is actually too big for those preschoolers. And finally, by creating an Aurora City School District campus, we'll have all of our facilities in a central location, which helps from a building and ground standpoint, but also a technology standpoint. It makes movement more efficient for our traveling teachers, and it will finally allow us to have facilities at all levels, which will match and will also enhance the excellent educational experience and opportunities we currently offer to the young people attending the Aurora City schools. So, if once the board gives us a green light, if that happens at tonight's meeting, our next steps would be then to work with TDA over the next year to develop a master plan for the district. Now, that master plan would include the details for the exterior portion of the new buildings, such as parking, traffic patterns, as well as the interior plans, such as the size and arrangement of classrooms. It will be developed over the next year with input from students, staff, families, and the community as a whole. There will be a new building steering committee created, which will serve as a sounding board for the current construction committee. And we also will hold multiple staff and community meetings to gather ideas and information for the master plan. Finally, we intend to keep all the families in the Aurora community informed over the next year through communication via our final forms and by utilizing our facilities master planning project link, which is currently on our website and is updated periodically as we go through there. So this gives you sort of the overall vision of what we have going forward, but what we need to do first is get the green light to go forward from the board, and I wanted to be sure to make sure that we're available to answer any questions based on this particular recommendation. Okay.
Wait, I think there's a few questions.
Right, I was going to say, well, numerous questions, and I talked to several of the board members and individually, and there were many discussions to be had about location and design, and for the board member to those details out.
Right.
No, I have I guess, when we look at the enrollment projections, you've used that chart, and it helped us to see what capacity would be with current enrollment.
Right.
Do we have enrollment projections for future years that take into account expected growth within the community?
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks will still be concerned about seeing Miller at 95% capacity, and I think that's probably the one
That's one of the
that still
biggest,
stands
yeah.
out.
So the Ohio Facilities Commission is working on enrollment. We have one from 2019 that was done, but they're working on, based on our current enrollment, and they spoke with the city and got some background on the housing that's going up and the projected housing and things like that. So we haven't gotten those set just yet. But to give you a quick example of the Miller, and that's a great example, at 95%, with 4 classrooms remaining in the building, that would be approximately 80 more students added to the class of 212 there, which is pushing close to 300, 290 some students. Those are big classes. We are not, even in our projections of enrollment, not anticipating classes of 300, especially at the kindergarten level. What we have seen is growth from, over the last 20 years, I went back and looked at the data, growth from kindergarten to a class graduating of about 70 kids on average. So that class of 212, we're anticipating it being around the 280 mark by the time it gets out of the high school, but not at that particular level. So a class of, having enough room for about 300 students, we feel is even though full, is going to hold that enrollment growth.
And what was our graduating class this year?
250-ish, give or take. We've had graduating classes as big as 275, I believe, was our biggest one back in 2016. But we've been in the 240, 250 range. Right.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, how big was the sample size in the survey?
I mentioned that it was only about 120 people in the survey. We got a lot of feedback through the conversations. There were people that didn't necessarily, and then people have talked to us, both in and around the community, just providing some, general feedback. And again, the trend from all of those, both qualitative and quantitative, did point towards the high school, which, to be honest, coming in, I thought that I would be leaning more towards the elementary, but seeing the rationale behind that, I can see why that would be the more popular of the opinions.
I think, go ahead. Nope.
And with the date and times that you collected the samples, do you think that might affect the sample space?
Meaning in May and June, or?
Right after school, certain days, just 3 days.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we only have the 125.
Yeah, I'm sure people have been busy without question. They know we've actually had some people email and ask questions as well as share their thoughts and opinions, like I said, beyond that. But yeah, I'm sure there was lots of things going on at the end of May.
I think initially the shocking part to this is the expected location of a new high school.
Yeah.
I think that when you see that for the first time, you sort of rock back and you go, "What? Wait a minute. Where are we going to put that? How are we going to fit that all in there?" So I think that I'm glad to hear that kind of a master facilities plan would be developed that would show how does the parking work, how does the driveways work, and where do we replace that green space that the community is so dependent on, and that our teams are so dependent on for practice fields and such. So hopefully we can find a way to improve all of that, because I know the condition of those fields isn't great. As summer goes on, they get really hard and then they get muddy, and they're not the best for athletic use, but it's space that we have. So I think that'll be something that the community will want to understand, and then there'll probably be questions about the Craddock property, and if we could answer all those questions when we get to the end of that year, of planning and have sort of a large scale map of what a north campus and a south campus would look like, I think it would really help people out.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. In fact, the amount of meetings that we're going to be busy over the next, 12 months, that sort of thing, going through, because we really do come August, September of next year, want everyone to understand what it is that they're going to be voting for on a potential bond issue in the fall of 2024 from that end. And from there, I think we're going to have so much input. I'm very excited about the process because it is going to provide an opportunity not only to educate, but for us to design something that the community really could embrace.
I would just kind of echo a bit what Mr. Akam shared about location being a bit of a potential concern. I think traffic flow is something we would want to see. I've heard members of the community that have that concern that, it's already challenging enough. You add another building, you add that traffic. So that's something I think having a detailed plan to see how that would work would be important.
Right. Agreed. Yeah, how I've been describing this to people, where we're at in our trip, it's like we're planning for a vacation and we're deciding, are we going to go to Disney World or are we going to go to the beach? And so that's what we have to decide, how we're going to get there, whether we drive or fly, what we're going to do when we're there, all the other plans. That is going to be planned over the next year so that people can decide, hey, do I want to go on board with this or not come, again, fall 2024. So lots of stuff still to go, but it's going to be an exciting process at the same time. I can really envision this being something that could be a centerpiece for the community. Any other questions? I know there'll be a lots over the next year too, but right now.
So you're looking for a green light, right?
Yep.
So do you proceed with the recommendation?
And that means that TDA gets a focus on their effort and their time on looking at a high school.
Right.
We would that would be what we would be working towards.
You got it. Yeah, very similar to when we whittled down the 3 buildings and dropped the intermediate school to just the elementary and the high school. Now we'll drop the elementary based on this recommendation in the green light to the high school, and they'll be spending the next 12 months focusing on answering all those questions that we currently have about that and designing a campus that will fit our needs.
Last question.
Yeah.
Will they also be able to assist us in looking at alternative locations and whether or not there's property available and what the pros and cons of that would be?
Yeah, so I think early on in this master planning process, they have not, based on feedback from the board that I've gotten, they haven't gotten to hear this news yet. So they're hearing this for the first time, that the location might be a little bit of a concern. But that's the idea, is that we will sit down and look at possibilities. Right now, this is the only location that we own that would, as you guys know, that would house a high school building. The Craddock property's too small, and all the other kind of nooks and crannies of the campus don't fit. So we would need to find a location, whether it be connected to the campus or separate, that we could get a price on,
Yeah.
and that's available. And then that could be something that, we would want to decide somewhat early on in
Well, I
that
know
process.
there are pros and cons to it, right? You
Yeah.
want your high school to be close to your stadium. There are a
Yeah.
lot of reasons why you want that to be there.
Right.
And I think that at least looking at it and seeing if there might be an option could assist folks
Yeah.
in looking at it. But I think it's really going to hang on what's that traffic and parking
Yeah.
pattern going to look like, and how do we control that and improve it?
Yeah, and I think in doing this, simultaneously we'll be developing what I feel would be, a rendering for the current recommendation, so that people can envision and start to see that piece as well. So maybe that'll ease some of their concerns and anxiety that's associated with that, if we happen not to be able to find the property.
Last comment I have is just I'd like to see us get a little more buy-in and collaboration with the city, just so we can have their support of the plans. We've seen with the trailers that things take time and there are, hoops to jump through at times. So with the project of this scope, I think that would be important.
Yeah, I really hope the trailer is not a preview to what this project could be in terms of time. You are correct, the trailer at Layton, Tony. So that would be something we'd want to make sure that, and that's where TDA's expertise comes in, because they've dealt with municipalities all over Ohio, and so that'll be very helpful for us. Okay. Green light? All right.
The board will discuss which one or two of us will serve on the
Fantastic. Okay, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And this will be something that TDA will be doing a lot behind the scenes in the next couple months and things like that, and then we'll revisit this more towards a December, January type of thing, because of just the timing of everything. Okay. That's the end of my report. Thank you.
I just said to you, but I'm happy to answer questions if you would like. Just, I have extensive report on buildings, so I just, typically in the summer I don't do a report, but I wanted you to see all the hiring individuals and hiring all the different buildings, which have been really pretty expensive. In time consuming, we started that in March, just wrapping that up, we did actually fill those oppositions I mentioned here, pre-K opposition in the speech and language Jesus, some position. Those recommendations are on, are on the agenda. So really, we're down to one position, which is a credit recovery for the virtual opposition in high school, and that's it. And that, I don't know if they'll fill that prior to, it might be later in July. So I was one of the board we were finally wrapping that up, and it's been pretty expensive. That's great.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Mahalis. Yeah, today I have, I think, 6 different things for your consideration, so most of them will move along pretty quick. First one is Exhibit D1, which is the financial statements for the month of May. In May, our expenditures exceeded revenues by about $2.7 million, so decreasing our cash balance, general fund cash balance, to a little under $17 million. Revenues are about 10% greater than projected, and expenditures about 2% less. Really, the only thing to talk about on the revenue side, we did get our property tax allocation for Summit County, along with the rollback. $73,945 was the rollback, and another $4,600 was the homestead. Expenses are all pretty much running in more or less what we had projected for the year. So thus far for the fiscal year, our revenues are about $640,000 greater than projected, and expenditures about $51,000 less. So right now we have a favorable variance about $695,000, 11 months into the fiscal year. So we're running ahead of projection. Especially on the revenue side, expenditures pretty much right about where we had anticipated. So that's D1.
All right. So D1, resolution to approve financial statements and reports of explained in the packet. May I have a motion to approve?
Moved?
Second.
Any comments or questions?
Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Akam,
Yes.
Mr. Zayas.
Yes.
Mr. Sobolski.
Yes.
Okay, so next we have D2. And D2, this is the resolution of necessity for the question of putting an additional levy on the ballot at the November election. So this is the first of 2 resolutions to actually put a levy on the ballot. This particular resolution, upon its passage tomorrow, we will forward this on to the Portage County Auditor, and they will certify how much money that a 5.9 mil continuing operating levy will raise. Then at a later board meeting, then you would then vote to actually put it on the ballot. So this doesn't, obviously obligate us to do anything at this point. It's the first of 2.
So
Yes.
And by when do we have to meet in July?
Well, we have to have the second resolution passed and at the Board of Elections by 4 PM on August 9th. So technically, I guess you could meet, first of all, in August, but we don't want to cut it that close.
Yeah, and we meet in July, and we need to have a special board meeting.
Yeah.
Could we do it the earliest that we could do that time?
Should be. Past times, I'll get this down to the county auditor tomorrow. Usually I hear back from them within a week to 10 days at most. So I'm assuming that I should have their certification of the amount by next week, maybe even at the end of this week. And then once we have that, we could, set a date and pass the resolution to proceed. Yeah, it has to have four affirmative votes to put any ballot or issue on the ballot. Sure.
Okay, so the D2 is a resolution of necessity for the question of levying an additional tax. I have a motion to approve.
Second.
Any comments or questions? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Mahalis? Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Next is to approve our 22-23 final appropriations. So these are the appropriations for this fiscal year. And basically, we're adding and subtracting in different places to cover what we have either spent or be on purchase orders. And in the end, we won't expend as much as what's been appropriated because a lot of it will just be, there'll be some purchase orders and that'll carry over in the next year. So in reality, it'll end up being appropriated again next year. Some of the bigger changes you'll see are gonna be in your federal programs. General fund has a larger expenditure increase to it. And the main part of that is because we're advancing a lot of money out. Typically, we don't advance this much, and that'll be another resolution, but most of those advances are tied into ESSER funds, which are gonna be encumbered, and so we're fronting the money until we can get it through the state from the federal government, and it'll all be paid back to the general fund. So a large amendment, in the end, it's not really gonna be an expenditure. Well, it will be, but the money's coming.
So the D3 resolution to approve 2022-23 final appropriations. I have a motion to approve.
So moved?
Chair seconds. Any comments or questions? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Mahalis? Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Okay, D4, these are 23-24, so these are the appropriations to start next school year. So we could begin the year, issue purchase orders, make payments for things, payroll, so on and so forth. General fund is set pretty much in line with what we have in the 5-year forecast, which was approved back in April, and most all the other funds tie into what had, been expended in previous years. You'll see again larger ones, ESSER, because a lot of those funds will be expended next year, both in our SAS and our ARP ESSER funds. So a lot of federal funds being expended, bond retirement, that's just tying in with our debt payments, PI funds, just various projects, and also latent payments come through there.
Okay, so D4, resolution to approve 2023-24 appropriations. I have a motion to approve.
Move.
Second?
Any comments or questions? Mr. Rossi, please call the roll.
Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis? We're up to D5. This is a then and now statement. This was a then and now actually for Nutrition Group, and the purchase order wasn't processed before the date of the bill. So we have to have the board approve it. Anything over $3,000 requires board approval on it.
D5 is a resolution to approve the announced statements. I have a motion for approval.
Moved.
Mrs. Mahalis,
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski,
Yes.
Mr. Akam,
Yes.
Mr. Zayas.
Yes.
And finally, D6, last but not least. These are transfers and advances, the end of school year. Just a couple of transfers. We're transferring $40,000 into the athletic fund. We've done that pretty much on a regular basis, as the cost of the athletic department typically outweigh the amount of revenue that it could bring in. And the other is $30,000, and we've done this on an annual basis. This is kind of a transfer from within the PEI fund, just kind of going from the general portion of PEI into the turf replacement fund. And we kind of put the money in there so that over a period of about 10 or so years, there's enough money there to replace the turf at the stadium. The rest of them, the large number, $694,000 are advances, which will be paid back to the general fund after July 1st. And you can see the big dollar amounts on there are your, well, there's $100,000 to athletics. 499, 923B is we're getting a school bus from the funded $45,000 through the state, but we can't get the money until the bus comes when we pay for it. So, but it's still encumbered, so we have to put an advance in, and then you will see all the federal programs. The main one, $335,000 is ESSER. ESSER 2 SAS, which we have our Harmon Chiller, which is going to be approved later, is going to be purchased through there. So a lot of federal programs. So we're fronting the money. Then once the bill comes due, then the federal dollars will come in and pay for it.
So moved?
Second.
Mr. Cebulski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Akam,
Yes.
Mr. Zayas.
Yes.
And that concludes it.
On to new business. Under action items, we have a resolution to accept gifts and contributions. We see that Charities Aid Foundation donated $1,009 to the Boy Soccer Program and Mayor Orthodox donated $500 to the Lakeland Robotics Club. I have a motion for approval.
Moved.
Second?
Comments or questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Carlson, please call the roll.
Mr. Akam,
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Zayas.
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski.
Yes.
Under personnel resolutions, I'd like to take the first one by itself. That's exhibit E1B1, the resolution to accept resignations. May I have a motion for approval?
Move.
Second?
Okay, I just wanted to take this separately because I wanted to thank David Colangelo for 25 years of service to the district. We thank all these people for their years of service, but 25 years is a long time. And she gave a big chunk of her life to serve the students here in Aurora, and we just want to wish her well and best of luck in your future. Anything else? Mr. Carlson, please call the roll.
Mr. Zayas,
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Akam,
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski.
Yes.
Resolution is accepted without objection. We should take exhibit E1, E2 through E10. Okay?
Yep.
Exhibit E1, E2 is a resolution to award supplemental contracts. Exhibit E1, E3 is a resolution to award supplemental continued contracts to Young District Personnel. Exhibit E1, B4 is a resolution to employ substitutes, support staff substitutes for the 2022-23 school year, which ends on Friday of the year. Exhibit E1, B5 is a resolution to employ substitute, support staff substitutes for next school year, ending July 1st. Exhibit E1, B6 is a resolution to employ specialists for next school year. Exhibit E1, B7 is a resolution to award teachers a one-year limited contract. Exhibit E1, B8 is a resolution to award summer supplemental contracts. Exhibit E1, B9 is a resolution to approve the introductory appointment of support staff. And exhibit E1, B10 is a resolution to award supplemental contracts to district personnel. May I have a motion for approval?
Moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions on all of this? Mr. Allison, please call the roll.
Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Resolutions are approved. Exhibit E1, E11 is a resolution to award supplemental activity contracts to non-district personnel. May I have a motion for approval?
Moved. Second?
Any comments or questions? Mr. Volleson, please call the roll.
Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis?
Abstain.
Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
All right, now we have exhibit E1C, which is a resolution to approve crowdfunding, which we talked about, last time, earlier this month.
Yeah, just a quick summary, if you recall from our discussion. 21st Century Funding is no longer selling popcorn and mattresses, but instead working through social media and using technology to help. And so we don't have a policy in place so that we can have a little bit of guardrails as our clubs and sports teams look to raise money. So this will help provide those guidelines.
Not yet.
Second.
Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis? Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
Exhibit E1B, resolution to waive the technical training for students in grade 7, 8 during 2020 school year. May I have a motion to approve?
Moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions? Could you just review this?
Yes, this is something we do every year. At the middle school level, we're not required by the state to provide technical training. That comes when they're juniors and seniors through our Excel Tech program. But we do things like career awareness, and our school counselors work with students to think about some of these things, but it's not training per se as described in here.
Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis? Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
Exhibit E1B is a resolution to approve the renewal of food service contract. May I have a motion to approve?
Moved.
Second.
I just wanted to be sure to thank Nutrition Group, who's here tonight. Brandon has done a great job working with our staff for developing them as with professional development, as well as helping to improve our food quality. So it's great having them on board.
Mrs. Mahalis? Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
Exhibit E1F is a resolution to approve the purchase of Tyler Drive software and related equipment. May I have a motion?
Moved.
Second.
I will say that this is software that is on our buses. It helps the bus drivers to be able to navigate. It's almost like a GPS type thing. Picture an iPad on the buses, but then also connects with our database so that we can have pictures of the students at each of the bus stops and things like that. So it just helps all around, and this is being purchased with our safety grant money.
And this really helps with substitute drivers as well.
Yes, it does. Big time.
Mrs. Mahalis? Mr. Akam?
Yes.
Mr. Zayas?
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski?
Yes.
Exhibit E1G is a resolution to accept bids and award contract for
So
reimbursement.
moved.
Second?
I don't know, Bill, if you want to kind of explain the process.
Basically, this is an advertised bid. This is the Harmon chiller replacement, so it's going to be paid both out of ESSER 2 SAS and also the ARP ESSER 3 SAS. So TDA was involved with the design of the project, and they'll be working with obviously Klein Mechanical, who is the low bidder, and Sal on our end, and getting this job done. So I'm going to be starting obviously this summer, finishing up, in the fall sometime.
Do we expect this work to be completed before school starts?
No, I don't believe so. Yeah, but being the chiller, hopefully it's, I'm not exactly sure as far as air conditioning when you start the school year, if anything's needed there at Harmon.
We're good until, we won't put the new chiller until
Okay. Cooling season.
this year's cooling season, then we'll put it. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So we're using the current
Right,
chiller.
right, so they won't
I understand.
take it out before, yeah. Until it starts getting colder, so.
So it's not because the existing one is broken or anything?
No.
It's time for the upgrade,
It's time for
end
it
of
to
life.
go, and we're able to
Yeah.
use the ESSER funds
Mhm.
to do it. So
Okay.
it saved us otherwise, which would have been either PI or general fund down the road to do it. So yeah, it's still operational.
Great.
Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Akam,
Yes.
Mr. Cebulski,
Yes.
Mr. Zayas.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to inquire about the status of the funds.
We are waiting for a resolution, a proposed resolution for the club to sports for the board to decide if that's something that they would like to implement from there. So. I was going to say they can be a club if they want in terms of that. They're doing open fields this past spring, and we're anticipating that this fall that they will be a club, but their goal ultimately is to become a varsity sport. They just have to approach the high school principal and ask about that, and then have a advisor that'd be willing to, spend the time with them. From there, typically a club is a pilot for at least a year before it officially becomes, or I should say it's an activity for a year before it becomes a pilot, and then a pilot into then a general club in that sense. So. No, board does not have to approve clubs. It's just a matter of going through the process at the high school level, or the middle school, for that matter. Yes.
Have you ever gone through that process?
I'm sorry?
Attempted to go through that process? Did we have discussions about them already being blocked from attempting?
No, they've never been blocked. No, they've never been blocked from that point. My understanding is this is the first year that they've approached Mr. Hayes about starting a club, and that's when we started the process of looking into that. Their goal, because it's a sport, is why we jumped into the idea of the process of going from a club to a sport in that particular resolution. But in terms of as a club, they have not been officially, requesting that, so they've not been denied nor accepted up until this point. But we're anticipating them being a club this fall. They already have. Yes, yeah, they've submitted the final form that he has, electronic form to do that. Yes. Yes. Yes, and they have an advisor, Mr. Cucarola and Mrs. Janzig are both interested in helping be advisors.
So how long does that take, open process take? If you want to file and then it becomes the.
It's really just a matter of Mr. Hayes reading over it in the spring. It basically, they had everything lined up in order to be that, which is why they were kind of given the green light to go ahead and start open fields. But because we started the season already, the school year, I should say, they'd be officially put onto the list in the fall. But they've been running open, like I said, open fields over at Layton. Yeah.
So it can't be approved before the fall? I'm just saying, not by the board.
Yeah.
There's some, you won't look it over until the fall.
No, he has looked it over, and again, for all intents and purposes, they're good to go as far as a club goes. That's the anticipation is that they would be, Mr. Cucarola and Mrs. Janzig would be, asking kids to become more involved. Although lacrosse, my understanding is a spring sport, but that might be something that they still do in the fall. Just, you know, we've had people do things out of season. Yeah.
My
That help?
concern is just 'cause they might pass up funds that are out there this summer for potential for next year. So if you wait and not look over, and not wait until the fall to make that decision to give them that, they'll pass off on $1,000.
You mean from like fundraising?
No, from USA funds. From
Oh, I see, I
entities
see,
that will provide
yeah.
funds for the clubs.
Well, clubs typically get approved at the beginning of each school year in August, so that's what we're looking at when it goes through the advisor approval. You know, the percentage that the advisor are paid. I guess that's when that's officially approved in August. But I guess we can work with Mr. Cucarola and Mrs. Janzig to you know, if there are some funds out there, yeah.
I don't understand
Yeah.
all the details between what you're saying about the
Yeah.
funds, but if we have people who start up to save our fortune or whatever, maybe we could.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely, yeah. I didn't realize that there were some money opportunities, I guess, is what you were saying, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we'd hate to see them miss out on a sizable dollar amount that could help them during their club status.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can touch base with Mr. Cucarola or Mrs. Janzig.
And then, the only other board item I have is that we do need to schedule this meeting sometime in July. So I'll be in touch with all of you, some options and, get that done. Okay, anything else? Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Mr. Dawson, please call the roll.
Mr. Cebulski,
Yes.
Mr. Akam,
Yes.
Mrs. Mahalis, Mr. Zayas.
Yes.